First of all, I just want to say I love this film. And I'm so happy that Emma Seligman, the director, can join us tonight. I could really, well, I'm not going to go so much of my thoughts, but I could just say I really related to the main character, with social anxiety and just, being in your 20s and having a lot going on, and it sucks to have to go to those type of events to explain it. But anyways, I'm really excited to, start going with the Q&A. Before I bring Emma up, I wanted to give an introduction to our moderator, Dawn Borchardt. She is a film festival producer, podcaster, and filmmaker. Dawn is the host of the podcast Faux Reel, where she interviews indie filmmakers about their lives and films and how they intersect. Dawn is also a big fan of the horror genre. We will be taking audience questions at the end. This is a 30-minute Q&A, and I'll come up at the end to talk about what's coming up next week for our April showcase. So I will say goodbye, and then Dawn and Emma, you can come up now.
Hello. Hi, Emma.
Hi. Hello.
It's nice to meet you virtually.
It's nice to meet you too.
And welcome everybody. I'm super excited to do this Q&A with you. I saw this film first a few months ago and loved it. And so when Rebecca asked me, I was like, heck, yes. Very nice mug that I thought was appropriate.
Fantastic. That's great.
So you're the writer and director of the film. So I just wanted to start with a really basic question. What was your inspiration for this film, and kind of a little bit more about your background and what led you to write this story?
Sure. So I made this first as a short film in college. It was my thesis. It was my senior year project. And I just think I was encouraged, to make something just affordable and achievable and not go too ambitious in scope. Because I think so often film students do that because they're like excited to just do something crazy big while they have the equipment and the chance to. But I sort of gravitated eventually to something that I could relate to and something that I could write really easily in terms of in the world of characters that I knew super well. So for me, it was always going to be at a Jewish family function because I just felt like I could write dialogue from that community like easier than I can write dialogue between, college students or any other community I belong to. So I did that. I chose a Shiva because I thought that at least in my Reform community, to me, they feel sort of funny because they feel like any other family event, even though someone's just died, it's sort of like the vibes stay the same. So I thought that was always funny and sort of had inherent contrast. And then I thought about what could be even more contrast. And, that's like a sex life or a sugar baby, sugar daddy relationship. And I just wanted something where two worlds would clash. And I thought about two opposite ends of myself and what it would be like if I, told my family about my sex life, like, when your cousins are like, how are you? What are you up to? Like, you're like, oh, I'm studying or whatever. But really, like, what's on your mind is like, this guy won't text me back. So that's really what I'm up to right now. Or like, I tried sugaring last month and I didn't like it. Like, you're not honest. Everyone has a sex life and a family life. Usually they don't collide. So I just thought it would be funny if they did. So that's where the inspiration came from.
Well, my dad's watching this Q&A right now, so I'll just have to be careful about what I say.
Hello, Dad. Hi, Dawn's dad.
What little parts about you made it into these characters? Like, what are some maybe fun quirks that you added in?
A lot. I think that I sort of took mostly from my experience being at family events, sort of, around the age of like 17, until now, honestly, until now I sort of have a film that's out in the world. So they're like, oh, okay, we understand what you're doing. But I feel like you turn a corner as a young person and even young woman, especially. And all of a sudden people are like, so wait, what are you trying to do with your life? And like before that, they were just like, what classes are you enjoying? And I just took from sort of all those anxious feelings of trying to like explain how I was going to try to make money in film, and also my boyfriend, girlfriend, sex life. Like I felt like I feel like everyone gets those kinds of questions, but I found them particularly awkward and uncomfortable. So that was the base of what I put in there in terms of just the setup of the movie and the discomfort that she's experiencing. I don't know. And I think that I always, when I feel awkward at family events, gravitate toward the buffet. Like I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna get food 1 second, because you're just like, I got to get out of this conversation. So I that's a quirk. And I think that like the relationship with Maya and Danielle, I'm bisexual, so that's part of me that I put in there, but also like just the fact that they can't communicate is something that I really wanted to put in there, that I relate to, that I think is specific to my generation. That is really unfortunate that, I think at least in my community, I feel like there was sort of like it was a competition for who cared less and who wanted to communicate the least and who was the most vulnerable, or the least vulnerable. So I just thought I wanted to put that in there. So when the two of them have a conversation about like, well, you replied to my story and you never said anything or whatever. I just think that shit is so stupid. And yet all of my friends we're like, but they didn't respond to that message. So clearly that means something or whatever it is. So these are sort of parts of myself I put in there. Yeah.
There are some quotes that I really loved, and I just thought of one when you were talking about that, which was when a woman asks, "Are you still making those little movies?" or like little videos like that.
Yeah.
Really resonated with me a lot, and I feel like it's very relatable.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's a lot of really great feminist quotes in there as well, or quotes about feminism. And one that I loved was feminism isn't a career, it's a lens. And I went to school for film with a minor in gender and women's studies as well. So films for me. But I was wondering if you could talk about your experience as a young female filmmaker, and working in the film industry in general through that feminist lens. Like, what has that experience been like for you?
I feel really lucky in that I don't think I've thought about it too much. I feel like I've sort of been naive in a way that has helped me only now that I'm around the corner, because I think I just said I'm going to do it and I didn't think I would have to overcome. I sort of, the idea of having to overcome obstacles because you're a woman or because you're any marginalized person in any industry, but specifically in film, obviously that concept isn't foreign to me. I understand it, but I just didn't think about, well, how am I going to do this? It just didn't occur to me. I think that in film school, especially, like it feels so equal when you're in there, and I think that maybe if you're 5 years out, 10 years out, you've already experienced sort of the inequity in whatever you're trying to do. And I think I just wanted to run with that steam of like, well, other people have been successful for my program, so like, why can't I do that? So I don't want that to be a cop-out answer, but I just honestly didn't think about the hurdles. And looking back, I look at the hurdles we went through and I don't know, honestly, like if me being a woman affected them. Like they very well could be. And I don't want to dismiss that. And then in terms of like the feminist lens, in terms of storytelling, like I just want to tell stories I relate to. And I think I don't think about what is a feminist story or what's not a feminist story. I think I just wanted to make something that was interesting and relatable and authentic to my experience, in terms of especially sort of like me reconciling with my sexual power when I felt like I had no other power in the world, and then was sort of realizing this only power I had limits. And I don't know. Yeah, I just didn't think too hard about it. I think just women telling stories from their perspective or from their interests can often just be feminist, I guess, because like you're somehow you telling your story or a version of your own story is unheard before and not heard in that specific way. And in that way, it sort of, it says something different and it feels like femininity or whatever, but really it's just giving us a chance to tell stories. I think it's that simple.
Yeah, I love that. That's very freeing. I wanted to ask about, especially with this being your feature directorial debut, like, and it's such a big thing to make a feature film. What are some of the things that you learned maybe about yourself, or that you've grown in that process, or that this film has taught you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned is that you have to take care of your body and your mind and your energy, and your health, honestly. And I think that being young and using your youth to hustle and be like, it doesn't matter that I'm not sleeping. It doesn't matter that I'm, babysitting from these hours of the day, and then I'm working and writing or editing or whatever it is from these hours of the night. Like, I don't regret anything I did. And I also don't think I I don't know if it would have happened if I didn't sort of run my body into the ground. But I think that just at least understanding that is something that is very well likely to happen, is your body feeling like wrung out like a towel. I wish I had known that going into it, because I think it would have made me just treat myself with a little more care, because I think that it's easy to get down on yourself and hard on yourself when things aren't working out, because for a first time feature and for an indie, there's always shit that's not working out. And I think I don't know, if I knew that this was going to be a long process, especially even through post, just getting to the final finish line, if I knew that I was going to feel as shitty as I did, just physically and mentally, I might have gone a little easier on myself. So I think that was the biggest thing in terms of a learning curve. And it's great when you're so enthusiastic about something, you want to give it your all and you want to put every blood vessel you have into it, but that comes at a cost, especially when you're not comfortable and you have to deal with all these other things in the air. So I think that was the biggest thing I learned. And then also, just like, part of that specifically is that being on set is an adrenaline rush, and there's so many people and you're hyper stimulated and you're not sleeping, but it's okay. Like, you're just running off of adrenaline, and then everyone leaves and you go into a dark, small room to edit, and you're looking at people's faces that have moved on with their lives. And it's a come down. It's like that's how I feel like I like describing it. So just all that stuff, especially because I feel like this is a conversation specifically, I think, for female filmmakers or women interested in film. I watched and read so many interviews with directors going into Shiva, because I was like, I want to just be prepared as much as possible for anything in terms of, like, getting to know your crew or like specific lens choices or like anything I could. And no one talked about what I'm saying. Still a male dominated career, and it's not as easy, I guess, for men, I'm generalizing, but to talk about their feelings and to be vulnerable and say, this was really hard on my emotions and my body. So that was a long answer, but I just feel like I like talking about that because I think it's important for people to know.
Honestly, I think that's something that everyone can probably relate to, is watching this just in this last year in general. Like, I feel like so many people have learned like their work-life boundaries and physical limitations, because we've all just been pushed so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We do have quite a few questions from the audience, so I will go into some of those. Ray asks, how did you make the jump from making a short to a feature?
It's a big question. I think I always knew that the short was going to be a proof of concept for the feature. So I didn't know what that meant necessarily, but I think I had the idea in my head for a long time. So as soon as I wrapped the short, I started writing drafts of the feature. I think the thing that made me jump the most was having Rachel Sennott in the short and having her become my best friend, but also just super invested in seeing the film be extended. And I just became invested in me, but also having a vehicle for herself. So I think having a collaborator that was equally invested as I was, honestly, was pivotal, because she would check in and say, like, where are you with this draft? Or, what do you need from me? Like, where, my producers, Katie and Kieran, where are they on the budget? Or, how did this meeting go that you had? And I think my producers also became that invested, which is their job too, obviously. But I felt like Rachel being a part of the short and then the feature really, really helped. So basically, I just had someone to share multiple drafts with. It took a lot of drafts to figure out the right tone of the expansion, because one day, one house is creatively limiting, but also challenging in a fun way. And then the budget was just financing it was the hardest thing. And that is something that we tried all the sort of traditional ways. We tried getting many production companies that we'd interned for or worked for to finance it. They all said no politely and gave us advice in other ways that was very helpful. We tried grants, we tried labs, and then eventually we brought our third producer on board, and she had just done this process a year before, and she just said, we just need to reach out to anyone and everyone we know in our life. And we started with the people that we thought had money, and then we went even beyond that, to people who were like, I don't know if they have money, they have a nice car, but I'm not sure, or whatever it was. And then honestly, only Rhiannon Jones is associated with Cinema Femme. She was the first investor who came in, and I met her through another filmmaker friend, Amanda Kramer, and Rhiannon's whole thing is supporting female filmmakers. So Rhiannon didn't know me at all. She watched the short, she read the draft of the script that was there and said, okay, I'll invest. And then as soon as we had her support, because she's a real EP and has experience, we went back to all of our family friends and friends of family friends and all these people with 6 degrees of separation who we'd talk to and sort of gauge their interest, but who didn't want to be the first ones. We went back to them, and then slowly we just started collecting small amounts of money, or small investments, not small amounts of money, and we just cobbled it all together. And it was I think that's the indie model, the micro budget model. It was like a gajillion investors giving us like $5,000. Some were giving us 50,000. It was more than that, but that was the short to feature jump. And then also it helped that it was one day, one location. In terms of on a director creative level, it was like it was challenging, but I got to know the location really well beforehand, which was pivotal. And made a Lego set of it, and we just kept on being able to go back to it. And we had prep in the house for like a week. We found the house ourselves off Airbnb, etc. So it felt really, once we got to the second location of the sugar daddy's house on the last day, I was like, whoa, I was so thrown off. And I realized that like the first and only location being sort of all of the movie being one house made it so much easier for me to go to a feature project, because in some ways it felt like a short. Sorry, that was a long answer, but yeah.
All good. It's kind of a bummer. Like when I interview filmmakers, it seems like one of the hardest things is just financing, and that's like a lot of energy to put into something that isn't so creative. But
yes, it's like you become a professional emailer. That's what my friend Amanda says, who connected me to Rhiannon. Yeah. You're like, this isn't what I was, whatever.
Yeah, you're like, I'm trying to make a film, not like just raise money for something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, we have other questions. So you touched on this a little bit in that answer, but Alam asks, what was the writing process like, which you talked about, but he also says, how did you draw out so many subplots from a single location and situation? So maybe focus more on the subplots.
Yeah, sure. I think that I did multiple drafts, and the thing that was the hardest to crack was tone, because I wanted to fill it up with entertainment, because otherwise why are we watching this one day in this one house? That's so boring. But then it felt so slapstick, because I was like, and then this guy does this, and it just felt like unrealistic. So then I wanted to bring it back to a grounded level, but then I was too boring. So I ended up sort of swinging back and forth until I was in the middle, and that was a hard thing to do. And then in terms of subplots, I feel like the short had the parents' relationship and it had Max. And so I knew I wanted to expand on his marriage and use the wife as sort of an ironic device, because she doesn't know. And you're like, is she going to know, etc. And I always knew I wanted Maya, because I wanted Maya to be in the short. And then I was just like, there's no room. So I brought her into the feature. And I think that was the hardest thing to add in terms of a subplot, but it felt important to me, one, to showcase Danielle's bisexuality and how that sort of makes her feel even more awkward in the space. And also because being bisexual when you're that young, I think sometimes already feels confusing and weird because the world is so polarizing. And I wanted Maya to represent all the things that Danielle isn't in her community. So Maya was the only hard subplot to work in, but I think I just kept seeing it as Danielle's having the worst day ever. So how can all these people like get in her way and make it worse, you know, and add to her anxiety? So I didn't see them as individual subplots as much as I saw, well, what can these two characters do that's going to make her day worse? And so the subplots would emerge from there. So it's sort of like having a tree and then the branches stemming off of that.
Oops, I just lost it. Christine says that she loves the film and it's so relatable and jam-packed with so many extremely uncomfortable and hilarious moments. Was the off-camera look she's eating joke figured out or in post, or was it scripted? So I guess I'd also like to know if there was any improvisations going on.
That was improvised by the actors, the extras, who were the old women who, not old women, I shouldn't say that, the middle-aged women, the older women who were smoking in the backyard. That was improvised by them. And there wasn't, I wouldn't say there was improv, but there was a ton of ad-libbing. I sort of, especially between Molly and Rachel, because I wanted their dynamic to feel natural. And I felt like that was the hardest dynamic to establish because they had history, but there was tension, but they like each other. So they ad-libbed quite a bit. And then every now and then Rachel would ad-lib a line. A lot of the time, Molly just took my line and made it her own. I don't know if I'd call it ad-libbing. Polly Draper improvised a lot. And she improvised a lot with Deborah Offner, who plays her best friend, the blonde hair. They improvised the most, I would say. They would create whole bits. There's about 2 or 3 bits that they share together that were improvised. So yeah.
Great. I'll take the last question from the audience from Chastity. She says, I loved it. The sound design was so integral to the story and drew me in even more. What was your process like creating a soundscape that reflected the visual discomfort your characters felt?
Yeah, I originally just wanted like natural diegetic sounds of like just like her legs scraping and the glass breaking and food clinking and stuff like that. And as we were shooting the movie, when we were shooting the scene where Danielle is talking to a bunch of women, but she's looking over at the baby and is way more distracted by the baby, and the baby's crying, and we're zooming in on both of them. When we were shooting that was the first time I realized that the dialogue I had written was just going to be background noise. And the scene was really about her and this baby across the room. And so then I realized, oh, we need music to sell that this is what this scene is really about. And then I just sort of became really interested in sort of the music representing Danielle's anxiety, and that being the thing that sells where we're at in the story and what we're supposed to be caring about. Because I think music can play into comedy, or music can play into drama or romance. But in this case, it's funny because it's like people have called it a horror score. At the time, I was just like, I want something klezmer inspired that's, you know, string based, like Yiddish klezmer music. But I don't want it to sound like So Fiddler on the Roof and hokey. So I started working with Ariel Marks, and she's incredible. And she was like, what kind of score do you want? And I just kept saying anxious. I was like, I want it to be anxious. And so she sent me a sound library of violin sounds and just told me to pick some of my favorites. And I highlighted all the ones that I loved. And it was a lot of like plucks and screeches and sort of jarring sounds. And then she just said that what I had chosen was, you know, pieces of a horror score. So I just sort of said, okay, like, I don't really care, you know, I like horror movies too, but I wasn't really thinking about that. So it was honestly that easy. Like, she's so amazing that she just sent me a sound library, and I was like, oh, I like these sounds. And that's how it happened.
Yeah, I agree with Chastity. Like, that really drew you in, and you just started to feel like, it was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So my last question that I wanted to end with was, what do you hope people see in your film?
I think that I hope that women feel seen in the like sort of various pressures put upon them that are completely contradictory and anxiety inducing. I think that approaching graduation was the moment that I felt the weight of both of those pressures sort of clashing of like, you know, in my specificity to be like a nice Jewish girl with like a stable career that has to sort of, you have to figure it out. You got to pay rent. You got to like, you know, like you transition, you know, if you're privileged off of your parents. So like having that figured out, looking for a boyfriend or girlfriend, but preferably boyfriend from your parents' perspective. And then the rest of the world is like, especially at NYU and just like the current landscape we're in with feminism is like, you know, be independent and sexually empowered and don't give a shit about what anyone says and wants you to do. Like, do your own thing and who cares? But you're like, but also my parents still are like helping me out, you know? So it's like, I just felt those two things totally clashing, and it gave me a panic attack. So I just hope that other young women or women in general, like, can feel seen in that sort of ridiculousness that those are two things that are expected of us, whether you're Jewish or not. And then I hope that men or anybody else sort of recognizes that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for joining us. I know that people were saying in the comments that they love the film, and the film is out in theaters now, virtual theaters. You guys can support your local small cinemas by recommending this film to all your friends and family to check out. So I really recommend that. But thank you so much. This was really great to get to talk with you.
Me.
Yeah,
it was great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. And yeah, I just love this movie. Oh, and this is something I forgot to do in the beginning because I just wanted to get started. But I'm wearing a Chloe Zhao shirt. And I just want to say I definitely want an Emma Seligman shirt to add to the collection because I feel like you are definitely going places, and I'm really excited to see, you know, where your career goes. And I can't wait till, you know, I mean, let's not jump ahead, but Oscars, I see it, you know, it could happen, but I'll hold back on that, but I'm a big fan. That's basically what I'm saying. So thank you, Dawn, for moderating, Emma for being with us today, and stick around with us next week. We're talking to Chris Ray, Isabel Sandoval, and our short films are on the Eventive platform to watch. And yeah, have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.